Well, that is what it is all about. It is time for today's big story as we look ahead to the weekend in Big Ten spring football. Look at the schedule coming up this weekend. Illinois Thursday night. The Illini under the lights. Iowa Hawkeyes go on Saturday. Now, that's more of a practice than it is a spring game. Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, all part of our Saturday broadcast schedule. And Purdue goes on Saturday afternoon as well, but that's closed to the general public in Ryan Walters' first year as head man coming over from the D.C. spot at Illinois. Speaking of Illinois, Anthony, we begin with Bret Bielema and year 3, and I mentioned increased expectations in the show open, and I think that's one of the biggest storylines. I know they didn't close out the way that they wanted to last year, had a couple of chances to lock up the West and let that slide by, but still, heading into this season, there's a lot of people that believe this could be the team to beat in that division.
And when you think about it, I mean, who knows? This may be one of the last seasons we see that division split up in the way that it is, East and West. And so if you're in the Big Ten West right now, you know, on the other side of things, that's maybe the deepest division in college football. This is an opportunity for the Illini to see if they can capitalize on where they sit as a program right now. You've got continuity on offense, at least as the play caller, the coordinator, Barry Lenny Jr. returning there. Obviously, you lose Ryan Walters as your defensive coordinator, but there's still continuity there with a number of assistants who were still working under him while he was calling the Illini defense before moving on to Purdue. And so, you know, you figure out what's happening at quarterback. Multiple talented running backs are there. They've begun to accumulate additional depth and talent up front on the offensive line. This is an Illini football team that, yes, should be considered one of the favorites in that division.
I'll get to offense in just a bit. Everybody always wants to talk about quarterbacks. Tommy DeVito and Art Sitkowski are gone, so it's really a battle between a couple of transfer guys. But to me, the more interesting story is defensively, because not only does Ryan Walters move on, but you had one of the most productive backfields, defensive backfields in all of college football last year. And most of those guys are gone. Sidney Brown is gone. Quan Martin is gone. Devin Witherspoon is gone. All guys that we're going to see on Sunday. Aaron Henry moves from the DB coach to become the defensive coordinator. That is a lot of moving around from a position area that was your biggest area of strength a year ago.
I wonder how Aaron Henry will end up deploying Taz Nicholson. You know, you do have one of your younger studs that's going to be back this season who was under, you know, a lot of those other guys who played at such a high level, those names that you rang off there. And so can you figure out if he's a guy who can maybe travel with the best opposing receiver? How do you sort of deploy him where the last couple of years here under Ryan Walters, you had so much experience and depth and confidence that you could have in virtually every DB, every corner, every safety, the nickel playing there in the slot. Now, maybe some more inexperience up there. You still feel great about that defensive front, the pressure they'll put on the opposing quarterback. So when you're young, when you're still learning on the back end, if you got a D-line that can impact the game, that can affect the opposing quarterback mentally and physically, then that should allow for a soft landing spot, especially where the schedule for the Illini isn't expected to be the most difficult.
Now, whether it is Paddock or Altmaier, those are the two transfers that are most likely competing right now for the quarterback position. I think the bigger question is at running back, because Chase Brown was an eraser last year for this team. You need a big play. You need to start to grind the clock out. He could do both of those things behind a pretty experienced offensive line. And I go back 2 years ago and I compare it to Michigan State, who had that huge year with Kenneth Walker. Right. With Walker gone, we saw the offense become so much less effective a year ago, and it impacted them everywhere. Is there any concern that you could see a similar story with kind of a game-breaking back no longer in that backfield?
I would say so, and not only because of the back, Rick, but because of the uncertainty at quarterback. That was at least one thing that gave myself and some others some confidence going into last season. You thought, all right, Peyton Thorne was going to return in East Lansing, and he'd be able to pick up where some things may have dropped with the rushing attack. For the Illini, that's not even the scenario. You lose one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country, and so now you got uncertainty at that spot. I do think Josh McCray and Reggie Love, but Josh McCray, when you think back to a couple of seasons ago, there's a reason going into last season where he was expected to split carries with Chase Brown. He's just been really banged up in a young Illini career. If they get Josh McCray into the season healthy, if he's continued to physically mature and just kind of grow into that young, kind of burly body that he has there, he's got star potential with his overall skill. But can you put that behind an offensive line and say that we can count on Josh McCray to be a guy who's going to carry the load for us?
And McCray and Love do have over 1,000 yards combined. It's not as if they're brand new to this program. They know what it takes. Just neither guy is going to completely come in and fill the shoes of Chase Brown, because that would be basically impossible for anybody to do. Again, Illinois Thursday night spring game right here on Big Ten Network. As for Wisconsin, one of the bigger stories in college football this offseason and considered one of the biggest hires and most impactful and successful hires, even though he hasn't coached a game yet, is Luke Fickell, who was brought along by AD Chris McIntosh. I don't think a lot of people believed this would be Fickell's landing spot, that maybe he was looking for someplace that had had even more success recently than Wisconsin, because that's what he would warrant coming from Cincinnati. How big is this hire, and how quickly do you think we see some type of seismic change with the way that Wisconsin plays?
It seems monumental to me, and not only because of the resume that Luke Fickell brought in with him to Madison, but we've already seen him reshaping the program in an image that I'm not sure many of us expected. I mean, you bring Phil Longo in as your offensive coordinator. This is going to be a completely revamped attack for the Wisconsin Badgers, a version of Wisconsin offense most of us have never seen in our entire lives. And perhaps, I mean, at the moment, just, resume and recruiting wise, we'll see what happens on the field, but probably the deepest quarterback room, if you're talking, starter and backups, who's expected to be the guys that would legitimately hit the field at some point. I'm not sure Wisconsin's ever had a deeper quarterback room, a more talented crop of individuals to potentially pick from. And so that already, you're just seeing how impactful it is with Luke Fickell coming in. Now, obviously, the results will be what they'll be. We'll see what that is when we actually get to the fall here. But just early on, he is already reshaping Wisconsin in the image that he thinks will suit the Badgers and thinks will reshape the modern version of what Wisconsin football, what Big Ten football can be. And you and I have talked about this for probably well over a year, Rick, where my curiosity, even with the previous regime, was how do you get Wisconsin from being a Big Ten West favorite, a Big Ten championship game contender, to maybe a national contender, being in that national championship conversation?
Isn't it recruiting? I mean,
I don't think it's just that simple, though, because even 2 years ago, they had the best recruiting class they had had in years. They had a top 20 class, a couple other top 25 classes. They've recruited effectively the development of that talent and the modernization of Wisconsin. I think that's a big part of what we're seeing Luke Fickell look to do. Bring in Phil Longo, get a bunch of quarterbacks, get a bunch of talent in the transfer portal at receiver. We're going to see a Wisconsin offense. Who knows how it's going to work? Who knows how quickly they can make it make sense there? But you go to SMU and get one of the leading passers in the country and bring him in there with you as well. It's going to be a style of play we've never seen from the Badgers.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more fascinating stories, not just in the Big Ten. I think it's one of the more fascinating stories in the country to see how much Luke Fickell's fingerprint is on this team from day one up in Madison. All right, let's go to your alma mater. You know a thing or two about Iowa football. Now, this is a spring practice. Kirk Ferentz is not a big believer in the spring game anymore, doesn't want guys getting banged up. We are going to see a lot of changes with Iowa. Defensively, they lose some really talented guys whose names you will hear early in the draft. What's the biggest storyline to you this spring in Iowa City?
Iowa fans would sort of look at me cross-eyed every once in a while, even last season, calling some games or discussing the Hawkeyes here on this show. Of course, Brian Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz's son and the offensive coordinator, trying to figure out how they get more out of the offense, out of the passing attack, will be the main storyline that everyone continues to look at. The play calling of Brian Ferentz honestly didn't concern me as much. I was more curious about just the development of the quarterback position. We didn't see Spencer Petras or, frankly, Alex Padilla get better kind of season over season with the mechanics of the position, with the decision-making, with their accuracy, even when receivers were schemed open. Last season, Sam Laporta and at times Arlen Bruce were kind of the only targets they even had healthy. And Brian Ferentz, with the play calling, he would still scheme them open at times, and quarterbacks would sail the ball over their head. Quarterbacks would miss them when they were open. So that, to me, is part of the question here. So having Cade McNamara come in, having a quarterback who's already experienced, who's already won a Big Ten championship, who's been on the big stage, and will have apparently some influence on the offense and being able to say what he's most comfortable with, perhaps the developmental aspect of that won't end up meaning as much as just whether or not you can get cohesion in the offense top to bottom. Still need some playmakers. They've lost a lot of guys at receiver the last couple of seasons here. Can you have some of the youth that was there, some of the youth that was banged up last season, begin to emerge in alongside what's an offensive line that should be as experienced as they've had in a few years? And
as much criticism as this program took last year and Brian Ferentz has taken for a couple of years, they were one win away from getting back to the Big Ten championship game, in a game that they were big-time favorites in before they lost in Lincoln on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Always interesting to hear, and I do believe the Iowa fans disagree with a lot of the things that you just said about the play calling. Trust me, you go on Twitter, and they're going to say that Anthony Herron is completely crazy. They don't care that he once wore the black and gold. All that still to be determined this year as to whether we see some more explosiveness and maybe more to the point, more consistency from that Iowa offense. Here are your up-to-the-minute Big Ten baseball standings. Nebraska overtakes Indiana for first place in the league. The Huskers coming off a weekend sweep over Northwestern. The Bats were alive. That has not just been the case over the past few games, but really over the past month for Nebraska, setting some crazy marks, both at the dish and pitching pretty well as well. And with all that in mind, we are excited to welcome in the head coach of Nebraska baseball, Will Bolt, following that weekend sweep of Northwestern. Will, let's start there. What were you most pleased with when you look back at that 3-game weekend performance?
Yeah, there was a lot to be happy about. Obviously, a lot of good signs from the offense, scored a lot of runs. I think, probably Friday's game, was probably, to me, the most impressive. Just our Friday guy, Emmett Olson's been so very consistent all year long. Had a bit of a rough start. They got after him a little bit, and we had to go get him in the 4th inning, and we're down 3 runs right there. So we went to our bullpen. They did a nice job of holding, and us kind of coming back in that first game, I think, kind of set the tone for the rest of the weekend. So really good sign from our team at that point in time to come back and show some fight there, and then really just use that momentum to finish off the weekend the right way.
Will, I know stats don't tell the entire story, but when you are as well-rounded as your group, they certainly tell part of the story. Your team ranks 2nd in the league in batting average, 2nd in ERA, and 1st in fielding. So I guess the simple question is just how well-rounded is this group?
Yeah, I think we've kind of felt that way going into the season, that we had a more veteran offense that was certainly going to help. And then we had some pieces of the puzzle with our pitching staff that we weren't, there were some guys coming back from injuries that we weren't quite sure what we were going to get. And it was a little bit up and down early in the season, from our pen. So we've felt like the offense was going to be much improved. We were one of the better offenses in the league when we won it in 2021. A little bit down last year. Felt like we addressed that in the offseason. So, and then having some veterans in the infield, I think, has made a difference. And certainly Dylan Carey, as a freshman, has played an excellent third base for us, too. So, yeah, it's a good sign. I mean, feels like you can win in a bunch of different ways when you've got, a good defense, you've got a good staff, and you've got some, versatile pieces in the lineup.
There are just 3 guys in the Big Ten right now that are hitting over 400. 2 are on your team. And nationally, there's only one other team in the country that can say they have 2 guys hitting over 400. I'll get to Max Anderson in a second, but let's start with Bryce Matthews, because he kind of starts things off for you guys as a leadoff hitter. How important is he in terms of both setting the table but also being productive himself when you look specifically at his RBI numbers?
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy if you look at that. I mean, he's got 50-plus RBI in the leadoff spot, which is almost unheard of. I mean, it means the bottom of the order is doing their job, getting on base and setting up innings for him. I mean, he's just been so remarkably consistent and just so remarkably clutch for this team. I mean, there's been time and time again where we just needed a big swing, and Bryce has been there to do that, all while playing shortstop, being a team captain, having, all the pressure on the world if he wanted to put it on his own shoulders to have a year that maybe he's not performing to his capabilities, but man, he has just been so consistent and really set the tone at the top of the order, like you said.
Well, I mentioned Max because there are very few guys in the country that could try to keep up with the stat line that Bryce is putting up, but Max is doing exactly that. He leads the league in hits, total bases, and slugging. He's 2nd in home runs. He's 3rd in RBI. Obviously, Bryce is one of the only guys that he trails. What's behind Max's success this year?
Yeah, Max has been a very consistent hitter since he stepped foot on campus, and he's done nothing but hit every step along the way. He was freshman of the year in the conference in 2021. He's gone to Cape Cod and hit over 300 for 2 years. He's a 300 hitter last year with 10 home runs on a team that didn't have a lot of protection around him. He's done nothing but hit since he's been on campus, and he's got a position change this year where he's playing second base. I think it's just allowed him and Bryce to kind of have a healthy competition too. where it feels like each time, one of them hits a home run, the other answers. And they've just been enormous. I mean, there was a lot of pressure on both those guys last year to kind of try to carry the load as sophomores, probably asking them a bit too much to do that last year. But again, the crosshairs were on both those guys going into the season this year. And Max has been very, very consistent, as he's been for his entire career.
You also mentioned the bottom of the lineup getting on base to allow Bryce and Max and other guys to do the things that they've done. So what other players have impressed you this season with their approaches at the plate?
Yeah, I mean, we've had several guys that have hit in the 9-hole, the 8 and 9 hole at the bottom of the order, that have been just really, really good at getting on base. I mean, Casey Burnham has hit 9-hole most of the season. We've since moved him up in the 2-hole. He's the fastest guy on our roster. He's got about a 450 on base percentage. Just a really tough out at the plate. Cole Evans has hit at the bottom of the order, and he's kind of set the turn the lineup over as well, and he's hitting over 300 with over a 400 on base percentage. We've had Garrett Anglam has been out. He was out for about a month with a pulled hamstring. Before that, he was arguably our best hitter to start the season, even despite the starts that Bryce and Max were off to. So we've got him back, and he's in the middle of the order and giving us really good at bats. And Dylan Carey's been a really good freshman for us, and a lineup that has a bunch of veterans. He's a freshman that's been over 300 for most of the year, and like I said, he's played great defense and driven in some key runs for us.
Will, I know it is officially a cliche, but does any cliche ring more true in sports than the baseball cliche that hitting is truly contagious?
No, it is. It's true. I mean, I think it's the case on the mound as well. I mean, once we kind of got some guys solidified in our bullpen, they kind of fed off each other too. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, sometimes all it takes is a spark, and when you've got kind of a team offense that is geared 1 through 9 to kind of take down the pitcher together, that a lot of times that's all it takes is just that spark, and then it just can kind of light that fire and ignite the entire offense. Now,
you mentioned Emmett's rare rough outing this past Friday because he's been so solid and so consistent. He has a sub-1 whip, which in college baseball is basically unheard of these days. He averages more than a strikeout per inning, and opponents are hitting just 181 against him, and that's after last Friday. So what is he doing so well right now in mixing his pitches?
Yeah, he's kind of reinvented himself a little bit this year in some ways. I mean, he's always been kind of reliant on the fastball because he's got a good fastball. The fastball plays up, especially early in his outings. He can run it up there to, the mid-90s. But what he's done such a good job of is just mixing. He's got a slower curveball. So now you're talking about a 94-mile-an-hour fastball and having to cover about a 72-mile-an-hour curveball. That if he's landing that for strikes, it's really tough. He can throw a slider as well. If he's got the changeup going, that's just icing on the cake, so to speak. So he's very, very competitive. I mean, that's the biggest compliment I can give him. He's just always there to make competitive pitches when the team needs him, and he's shown that. Honestly, since the day he stepped foot on campus, I mean, he just kind of had that mound presence of a guy that's coming at you. He's on attack. And really what he's done just a better job of this year is just when he's got a chance to put you away, he's doing that. And not always by the strikeout necessarily, but just inducing weak contact.
And in the moments when he does need some help, and it hasn't been really often, your bullpen has helped him out, helped out the rest of this starting staff, especially as of late. Sub-2 ERA over the last 11 games. How much is that by committee, and who has done a good job within that committee?
Yeah, I mean, Shea Shanneman is kind of where it starts and ends with our bullpen. He was off to a little bit of a rocky start early on, and man, he's really righted the ship. I mean, he's a fifth-year guy. He's been a starter. He's been a closer. We knew he was going to be kind of our X factor out of the bullpen. So he's been very consistent here over the course of the last 6 weeks or so. That's kind of helped get some other guys, some confidence as well. Kyle Perry and Jake Buns are two left-handers that are also veterans. Buns was our setup guy 2 years ago on our championship run where he was throwing every important 7th and 8th inning out of the pen. Kyle Perry's been a very, very big piece of the puzzle for us as well. And both those guys were coming off injuries early, so their stuff wasn't quite as crisp. Their command wasn't quite as crisp. And as the season's gone along, the weather's warmed up a little bit. They're getting further away from their injuries. They've really stepped up. And Corbin Hawkins is another that's really stepped up for us out of the bullpen throwing strikes. He's a sidewinder, right-handed pitcher, totally different look from anybody else that we have on our staff. Not going to blow you away with a fastball, but fastball to both sides of the plate and a slider that plays off that. So he's kind of helped solidify some things as well, but those veterans have really made the difference as their seasons have gone along.
I know that defense may not be as sexy as hitting the home run or striking out guys with 95-mile-an-hour heaters, but your defense has been so good. You have just 22 errors and well over 1,100 chances already this year. What's behind that success and just not making those mistakes that you can't afford to make against good teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's a focal point for us. I mean, we take really good pride in having a strong defense, and we kind of have those backgrounds at different places that we've been, just putting that focal point there. And again, it starts with good players, obviously. I mean, we're very, very strong up the middle with the two juniors, and Bryce and Max, as we mentioned before. Casey Burnham's a fifth-year player in center field who can go catch everything out there from gap to gap. And we got a really good catcher as well, Josh Caron, who's one of the top catchers in the country, in my opinion. So starts up the middle, being strong. Josh does a great job with our pitching staff. The two veterans, actually the three veterans up the middle, and Dylan Carey, like I said, I mean, he's played as good a college third base as you can play, and he's a true freshman.
Well, I do want to touch on the home field advantage. You guys have been really good at home. Your fan base is as good as any in the country at a lot of different sports and filling seats in pretty much every stadium that's there on campus or close to campus. How much of an edge is it for you guys to be playing at home?
Yeah, it is. It's a difference maker. I mean, you look at our attendance numbers, and it's by far and away the envy of the rest of our conference, just as far as how many fans show up. They support all of our sports. That's one of the main reasons that a lot of the guys have chosen to come to play at Nebraska is because of the great fan base, and we're averaging close to 5,000 fans a game just about every year. So sell out the season tickets before the season starts, and I mean, it is a massive game changer for us, where we feel like we can fill the seats there at Hawksfield at Haymarket Park. That it's a pretty tough place to play for our opponents. And for those who haven't been, it is an awesome baseball environment. And let's finish there, Will, because you're at home tonight. We appreciate you being with us on a game day. In-state rival Creighton. Now, Creighton's had the better of this series as of late. I think it's been 4 straight. So how important is it for this team, not just to continue the momentum that you have right now, but also when you play an in-state rival and what it means to the guys that are part of this program that understand area baseball? Yeah, I mean, they all know each other. I mean, they grow up playing against each other. I mean, half of our roster's from the state of Nebraska. They know the guys that are from the in-state teams, and so it means a little bit more that way because they grow up playing against each other or with each other, and the bragging rights are always there. But for us, we need to be better on Tuesdays in general. I mean, that's probably the one part of our the chink in our armor, so to speak, that we haven't been as consistent on Tuesdays. So whether we're playing Creighton or we're playing, insert top 25 team on a Tuesday, I think I would like our team to come out and have a great showing tonight. Even better that it's against Creighton, who's a good team and well coached, and I hope we'll have a great crowd tonight. The weather cooperates, and just another opportunity for us to go out and be a consistent ball club.
Nebraska baseball head coach Will Bullitt joining us on this edition of Big Ten Today. Huskers and Creighton, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 local time. You can watch it right here on Big Ten Network. Will, we appreciate the time. Best of luck tonight and, of course, throughout the rest of the season.
Yep, you bet. Appreciate you having me on.
Notable incoming transfers for Bret Bielema and company include quarterback Luke Altmaier in a bit of a quarterback competition. Obviously, some great names headed to the next level, especially in that defensive backfield like Quan Martin, Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown. Yes, Chase Brown is gone. Who will step in and fill some really large shoes? It's going to be probably more than a one-person effort. Aaron Henry moves from DB coach to defensive coordinator, taking over for Ryan Walters, who is, of course, now the head man at Purdue. And for everything Illini related, we are excited to welcome in our good friend Bret Bielema for today's big interview. Hey, Bret, great to catch up. I know you're a guy who likes to have fun, and you always have some fun during your spring game. So first and foremost, what's the format and what tricks are up your sleeve that you're actually allowed to share with me?
You know, Rick, we are in discussions as we speak. We have to get clearance from our sideline personnel to make sure we can do certain things. But I think the spring game is one of three things, right? We want to test and stress our guys. It's about as game-like as you get during the course of the spring. The second thing, obviously, we get to be under the lights in our stadium, practice a night game environment, which is a really big deal. And the third thing is we want to have some fun, not only with the fans that are there. We'll have a field goal challenge. We'll be interactive with that, but we'll also hopefully get the Big Ten Network crew involved in the game in some capacity.
Yeah, I've seen it before, getting reporters throwing passes. I'm glad I'm here in the studio. No chance for me to be embarrassed. One of the biggest stories in the offseason was the departure of Ryan Walters. You know, you and I spoke at length last year about the fact that you wanted to surround yourself with coaches who have aspirations and abilities to be head coaches. The great part is they're on your staff for a while. Obviously, the tough part is they move on. So now Aaron Henry, who was the DB's coach, is promoted to DC. How seamless has that transition been?
You know what? It's been pretty effective. I think even, last year, because of the timing of it, Ryan left in early December, which allowed Aaron to take over for the bowl game. And although we weren't able to win that baby, we did play really well defensively, kept a lot of continuity, lost some of our key players, and our young bucks stepped in. So not only Aaron, obviously new position as our coordinator, but have brought in Antonio Fanelis. The good news, Antonio and Aaron played together for me at Wisconsin. So they had a lot of familiarity. I moved our defensive line coach, Terrence Jamison, to a co-defensive coordinator. He runs our front and does a really, really good job. And then I was able to tap into the NFL. Those guys are always taking my guys. I finally took one of theirs. I got a outside linebacker coach in Charlie Bullen, who's been a nice addition. And the defense side of the ball has been a pretty steady performer for us all spring.
Well, that secondary was so good last year under Coach Henry. And I mentioned some of the guys whose names we will hear in next week's NFL draft. Who needs to step up? Who kind of becomes the leader of a group that has really been such an area of strength?
You know, two young guys that stood out last year, Matt Bailey, an in-state prospect from Moline, Illinois, who had all of one scholarship offer when we offered him, and that was from us. It came in and had as much impact as a freshman in the back end as anybody since I've been in a head coach for 15 years. Just a really complete player, pretty aggressive, really good football IQ. He made a huge impact a year ago. He'll be a leader coming back. And then also another freshman, Xavier Scott, a young man from down in the Palm Beach area that came in and did a really nice job. Really has a position flex of corner, nickel, and safety. So really excited about them. And we return a lot of really good players up front, probably the best D-line tandem in college football, and Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, and then an edge player in Seth Coleman and Gabe Backus, who was a first-team All-American true freshman. Tariq Barnes back at middle linebacker. We got a lot of really good players up front.
There's no doubt that front seven is so deep, and I'm glad you brought up Tariq. We had the chance on the game call last year to sit down and listen to that young man. He is as impressive as it gets, both on and off the field. Is he the guy that's in a position maybe this year, Bret, to be known? I know he's known inside the Big Ten, but it seems like he's a guy who maybe is ready to have the kind of year that he becomes a national name.
You know, Rick, it's a great point. He's got, really good skill set. He's got high football IQ, really has taken a step forward in his leadership skills. He's a Memphis kid that is done proud by his people and has really probably in this spring shown me a little added burst that he's had. Our guys do a great job in the weight room. A lot of our DBs went to the combine and destroyed the numbers there because of what they do year round here in our strength and conditioning with Tank Wright. So I think Tariq is a guy that can take a big jump. And next to him, we got some great competition going on with some young players, C.J. Hart, but Dylan Rosiak and Anna Olaga, two Chicago area kids who have done a great job for us here in the program.
I know a year ago you looked at your quarterback position and you had a couple of guys who it seemed like they had been in college for like a decade. Now those guys are obviously eventually have to move on. So a couple of transfers in quarterback competition, maybe with some young fellas as well. How has that competition played out in the spring?
Yeah, first, Donovan Leary, who we recruited in my first year here, has stepped in and had a nice spring, and really you can see what he can bring to the table. Has gotten better through 13 practices now, and he's has continued to improve. But two transfers in, Luke Altmaier, who came to us from Ole Miss, that has been very impressive, really good high football IQ. a really good, accurate live arm, got a good touch on the football, understands it. His daddy's a team doctor at Mississippi State. He's been around college football a long time. Really impressive young man. And then John Paddock, who's a transfer from Ball State, who has some lineage and some bloodline here that some of the greatest that ever played the game here at Illinois in their background. His granddad, John Wright, and his uncle were both phenomenal players here. And John's really stepped into a great situation here. Those three guys have battled it out. Another guy, Kirkland Mischau, is another guy. So excited about that room. Got some good players around them. Isaiah Williams returns at receiver. Casey Washington, Pat Bryant, and then two really good offensive linemen, might be the best in the country. Isaiah Adams and Julian Pearl at their position. We talked them into foregoing the NFL to hopefully build themselves into a high draft pick, and those guys have had a nice spring as well.
How important was that, Bret, when you consider that with Palcho gone and being such a rock on that offensive line and basically being the guy that everybody looked to lead that group, to have those two guys come back this year meant what for you?
It meant a lot. As you know, Rick, offensive line play is big in my program, what we believe in. And Julian Pearl and Isaiah Adams, and everybody, I love, everybody wants to talk about NIL, the portal world, and all that goes into it. The NIL allowed me to keep these guys, right? As players that you retain in your own program, we've been able to show those guys, hey, we can allow this type of money to be given to you through our collectives, and they strike a deal through the collective that works independent of us. But it allowed those guys to, hey, I can short-term this money here in the eventuality that, we had a young man a year ago who was the 29th pick in the third round, signing bonus about $850,000. If he would have been the 29th pick in the first round this year, it might have jumped up to a signing bonus of $8.5 million, right? And what you can tell these kids, sometimes you might gain somewhere 10, 15, $20 million by staying in school one more year. And that's what allowed us to do that, not just with our two best O linemen, our two best D linemen, and Johnny and Keith, and also Isaiah Williams at the slot wide receiver position. Those guys, because of NIL, have been able to stay and help this program continue to move forward.
Yeah, 1-0 may not seem like a big deal unless that zero is at the very end of what the contract looks like, and then it is, in fact, a very big deal. Let's talk about the departure of Chase Brown. Listen, everybody knows it would be unfair to expect whoever steps in to just step in and be Chase Brown 2.0. Those are unrealistic expectations. But you have guys back, and specifically Reggie Love and Josh McCray, who have combined for over 1,000 yards in this program. They know what it takes. So what do you expect from those two in the running back room as a whole?
You know what? Exactly what every other back in our program's done. I think about the first, we're in the Big Ten. You want to win that first Big Ten title right here. And I remember the first Big Ten title, I had a guy by the name of Jonathan Clay who went on to the Steelers. He was backed up by James White, who played 10 years in the league. He was backed up by Monty Ball, who ended up being a second-round pick, finished, I believe, third or fourth in the Heisman. And the fourth-string tailback was a guy by the name of Melvin Gordon. Well, those guys all stepped into their role and handled it. And I think that's exactly what we have now with Reggie Love and Josh McCray. Those two guys have waited patiently for 2 years. If I could do one thing over a year ago, I wish we could have lightened the load on Chase. There was a game where he had 43 rushes. We don't want to do that to a player. We don't want to do that as a program. So I think the more balance we can have in our running back room. We also have a host of three young guys that I'm excited about. So it's got to be by committee in the running back room, especially in this league, and to be fair to kids, not only during their college career, but when we recruit them, they go to the NFL. And I know that that's starting to build here at Illinois. We don't just recruit running backs. We recruit great running backs who have a chance to change their lives forever.
Bret, I know no one's expectations outside the program are going to be higher than yours are inside that room, but certainly they have increased over the past couple of years. How do you want the players to approach that? Because in today's day and age, as well as I do, as well as everybody does, they are in fact hearing it and seeing it.
Rick, that's a great way to phrase. This is the way I literally learned this one sitting in a team meeting room with Coach Belichick when we had won a Super Bowl with the Patriots. And I heard him say something that resonated with me. As a head coach, you have high expectations. You have dreams and aspirations for not only your organization, but the team and the players you're around. But really, in reality, as high as my expectations are, I hope our players are even higher, right? They're the ones that have this moment in time. As coaches, we always get one more year. For guys that are going into their last year or potentially their last year, you want them to be able to play their best football and achieve their life dreams at the highest level. So I do like the fact that our expectation level has been raised from the outside world looking in, but I'm more pleased by what the expectation level has risen in our building with our own players.
Always great to catch up with Bret Bielema. You will have to stay tuned to find out what kind of shenanigans and fun stuff happened Thursday night, along with the serious stuff that we know is going to happen during the spring game in Champaign. Hey, Bret, it's always great to catch up. We'll see you on Thursday night. We'll see you along the way. Best to you and yours.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. ILL.
Mentioned that it was a jam-packed weekend of spring football here on Big Ten Network. Proof positive. This graphic shows you Minnesota starts things off at noon Eastern, 11 local time. Then we'll head to Lincoln and then Madison, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. Spring games all broadcast this weekend on Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Let's look ahead to those games. Anthony Herron rejoins. We start with Nebraska, and obviously the biggest story is Matt Rule coming in, saw what he did at Temple, saw what he did at Baylor. A little bit of a rebuild here with the Huskers, a program and a fan base that is just dying for a championship.
Yeah. They are so passionate, obviously, at Nebraska, and they're hoping for so much from Matt Rule and the coaching staff that joins him there in Lincoln. You never know, man. I mean, they brought in some depth at quarterback as well, but some of it will have to be developed. Some of it, like Casey Thompson, banged up right now to have the opportunity to really even compete for the starting job for the moment. So we'll see how quickly they can get healthy and have all the competitive depth that Matt Rule wants to really see if the roster can compete against each other to continue getting each other better.
How long do you think he really needs to compete for a Big Ten championship?
Because it feels to me like at least a couple of years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like a year one, because it felt like it got close for a while under Scott Frost, and they obviously never got over the hump. So it was a competitive roster, but it just couldn't be a roster that consistently won games. So it's a little bit of a tear down to build it back up right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. After Bo Pelini, who won seemingly 9 games every year, it wasn't enough. The Mike Riley experiment didn't work. So then you go the opposite way with a young alum with Scott Frost. That didn't work. Now to a program builder in Matt Rule. Only time will tell if this one works in Lincoln. Another new coach, Ryan Walters, the guy that we mentioned, left Bret Bielema's staff to take over at Purdue. Obviously, there were some good things that happened last year in West Lafayette, good enough to land Jeff Brom a job to open things up for Ryan Walters, but he also has to replace some of that talent that led Purdue to the Big Ten championship game.
It's kind of interesting where last weekend was about all the quarterback battles, and this weekend is about some of the new coaches. There's a lot of new coaches that are going to be on the Big Ten Network and just taking the field, finishing out their spring activities this weekend. And Purdue fans were a little bit worried initially, not necessarily with the Ryan Walters hire, but they were curious. What's going to happen on offense? And I thought he made a very aggressive move to go out, spend what was necessary to spend, and essentially to recruit Graham Harrell to come in and run Purdue's offense. And so now you will continue to have this wide open passing attack. You'll continue to have weapons on offense. You got some experience like Cam Allen that comes back on defense as well. And guys are very excited with Purdue's defense to continue to build off of what they've begun to put in place in West Laf. And now one of the brightest defensive minds in the country takes over as the head coach for the Boilermakers, so you can combine those two sides.
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about Purdue going away from wide open. I'm surprised Graham Harrell has a arm left after his college career. Guy threw like 70 passes a game during his time at Texas Tech, if I'm not mistaken. And lastly, Minnesota also goes this weekend. Here's the question that I've been asked about PJ Fleck's program, and I think it's a fair question to ask, Anthony, whether you are siding yes or no. Is this a rebuild year with all the multi-year veterans that are gone from Minneapolis?
That's a good one. I hesitate to call it a rebuild. It doesn't feel like that to me in the Twin Cities because of the continuity that's been there over the years. Now, obviously, you lose Kirk Shiraka on offense, and you got Matt Simon, who's basically been waiting for this opportunity to run PJ Fleck's offense for years at this point. He's like the backup QB that never entered the transfer portal. Now he'll get his chance to call the plays for Minnesota. We've seen a handful of games from Ethan Kaliakmanis to be able to be the quarterback for the Gophers. Now, you lose Mohamed Ibrahim. Now you lose that back, not only what he did tangibly, but the intangible of what his leadership, what Coach Mo even was in a season that he missed. That's a lot to replace. Can you replace it with one guy? Maybe not, but it's Minnesota. So it feels to me like that offensive line, that running back position, it'll be a little more explosive. They've added some wiggle to the running back crew. So, I mean, it'll look a little different in the backfield, but I feel like Minnesota, and especially what Joe Rossi continues to do defensively, they're going to be right there in the thick.
And you know that a PJ Fleck team is going to be fundamentally solid. Right. They're not going to commit penalties. They're going to do things the right way. And that wins a lot of games. And I think that's why they've exceeded a lot of expectations each and every year. Folks say, well, I know they won 9 last year, but they can't do it again this year. And then they go and win 9 and they win a bowl game. So count against them at your own peril.
Sounds like you're thinking they're going to be elite.
Elite. They're always elite.
Well,
no matter what.